So the title is ICP monitoring in clinical practice, and these two pictures are self-explanatory of what is happening to intracranial pressure when you manage a patient with head injury. The top panel shows that this patient is undergoing multimodal monitoring, including transcranial Doppler and even the cardiac output monitoring. And down you can see this is the emergency room where many patients are lying on the trolley, not even on the bed. And nearly half of these patients are patients with head injury who do not undergo monitoring. And you will be surprised to know that these two pictures belong to the same hospital. So this is the real clinical scenario of ICP monitoring for patients with head injury. So only fortunate patient who gets admitted to ICU may undergo ICP monitoring, whereas in routine practice in most of the parts of our country, head injury patients are managed with any other patients in the emergency room. So what is intracranial pressure? ICP is defined by Monro-Kelly doctrine, stating that the ICP is the sum of pressures exerted by blood, tissue, and cerebrospinal fluid in the intracranial vault. And for the residents who often misspell Monroe, I would like to mention that it has nothing to do with Marilyn Monroe. So this happens when a mass lesion develops inside the cranial cavity. In the absence of mass lesion, there is brain volume, arterial volume, venous volume, as well as CSF inside the cranial vault, which is and freely communicating through jugular vein and through the spinal subarachnoid space. When there is an intracranial mass, initially some amount of CSF as well as blood goes out of the cranial vault, and when the mass expands, the egress of the blood and CSF reaches its maximum. So this is what happens in the initial stage. Even if there is little mass or no mass, even with addition of volume, there is no increase in pressure. At a later stage, increase in volume will result in some increase in pressure, but when it is fully compensated, even small increase in volume will cause raised ICP. So this is a real clinical scenario. This is a patient with traumatic subarachnoid hemorrhage and small contusions. You can see because of this hemorrhage, there was increase in the volume, but at this stage, there won't be any change in the intracranial pressure. This is a scan done on second day. There is increase in the edema, hence the volume has increased, and hence the pressure also increases in this patient. This is on fifth day. The midline shift has developed. So this is a stage when the patient has compensated. At all three stages, patient is conscious. But at this stage, if you wait for some more time, patient can cone and patient can deteriorate rapidly. So this is the fully compensated stage where even a small increase in the volume will result in marked increase in the intracranial pressure. The common conditions which we encounter in clinical practice associated with raised ICP, commonest obviously is traumatic brain injury, subarachnoid hemorrhage, CVT, encephalopathies, brain tumors, hemispheric infarctions, intracerebral bleeds, and even in infections like abscess, meningitis, particularly cryptococcal meningitis, IIH, and metabolic syndrome, particularly hepatic encephalopathy and acute hyperosmolar syndromes, are also associated with raised ICP and raised syndrome, and even in craniosynostosis, raised ICP is an indication for surgery. So what are the common ICP monitoring techniques available? The commonest which we use in clinical practice are invasive monitoring techniques. So in the invasive monitoring techniques, a small hole is made in the skull, and a catheter or a wire is inserted. A catheter can be inserted inside the ventricle and with external ventricular drainage connected to the pressure transducer. This is the same pressure transducer which we use for invasive arterial blood pressure monitoring, and we can get the waveform. You may use even a small wire like parenchymal sensor, which need not to go all the way till ventricle. It can go just 3 to 4 centimeters from the skull surface in the parenchyma. Now this is the important point for the residents. In case of head injury, when there is subgaleal hematoma, one may not be able to feel the coronal suture. So just go 11 centimeter behind the nasion and about 3 centimeter from midline. If you make a twistle and direct it to the opposite medial canthus and external ear, you will be able to hit even the small ventricle. Another tip, smaller the ventricle, closer to the midline should be the hole. Like you may go a 2 centimeter from the midline, but not 1 centimeter, otherwise you will hit the venous sinus. If there is some midline shift, you can shift your hole to 4 and even 5 centimeter from the midline. But this 11 you should not go beyond 11 centimeter from the cesium. So this I have put it in the chat. You can see the details about how to monitor intracranial pressure using external ventricular drainage in this video. Normal ICP. So in normal ICP, the first wave is P1 or percussion wave, second is tidal wave, and third is dichrotic march. So always remember that P1 is higher than P2. So this is a normal relationship of these two waves. Now what happens in high ICP condition? In high ICP condition, the P2 wave becomes higher than the P wave. Here you can see nicely that the P2 wave is higher than the P1, and you can see the ICP here is 30 millimeter of mercury, whereas in the previous case it was only 8 millimeter of mercury. So what are the abnormal ICP waveforms? The common which you read in the textbook, like A waves, which are the brief, lasting for less than 10 minutes or so. Sudden severe increase in the intracranial pressure even beyond 50 millimeter of mercury, lasting for 5 to 10 minutes, and then sudden drop. The common ones are the B waves, which have pressure values up to 20 millimeter of mercury, maybe little more, lasting for little longer, and C waves do not have any clinical significance. So this A wave you can sometimes see when there is a tube block or when there is a jugular venous compression, and as soon as compression is relieved, A wave will drop down. So A wave does not have much clinical significance, whereas the beta waves, like raised ICP more than 20-25, lasting for several minutes, more than 15 to 20 minutes, will indicate significant raised ICP and requires treatment. So I mentioned earlier external ventricular drainage and parenchymal wire for ICP monitoring. So EVD is considered as a gold standard, and it is oxymoron. The thing which is gold standard is cheap. So it is available for as less amount as 2,500 rupees. And it is same, like it's a fluid filled transducer and connected to non-compressible tubing. And it requires little practice to put it accurately inside the small ventricle. And as you have to put it in the ventricle, it is more traumatic. However, one benefit is that you can drain CSF to release intracranial pressure. And one major limitation is the catheter invariably gets blocked by the debris, and you cannot change it. Once you remove it, it will be very difficult to put it again. And it measures the global intracranial pressure. Whereas this microsensor parenchymal monitor, it is similar to EVD in terms of the accuracy. And the sensor is at the tip itself, so there is no need of external adjustment, and there is no expertise required to put this sensor inside the skull. So according to me, it can be done very easily even by non-neurosurgeons. Like in PGI Chandigarh, pediatric intensive care unit, even pediatricians are putting parenchymal monitors. So in terms of skill requirement, the skill required to put a parenchymal sensor is less than that is required for subclavian venous cannulation. And it is less traumatic as the catheter does not go too deep. However, CSF cannot be drained, catheter does not get blocked, and it monitors more of local pressure. So you have to be sure that you put it on the pathological side rather than on the normal side. However, it cannot be recalibrated once inserted. And it is very expensive, more than 20 times the cost of EVD, 10 to 20 times. One major advantage of EVD, like when we have also done and published, is that CSF drainage. So before you start any specific ICP targeted treatment, first step is you can drain CSF and reduce the intracranial pressure. Even after CSF drainage, ICP does not come down, then you have to give mannitol or hypertonic saline. And even if that ICP does not come out, we don't give hypothermia. It is not found to be useful. Barbiturates and propofol may be given, but they have a lot of side effects. And then we directly go for the surgery like decompressive craniectomy. And meanwhile, while the patient is prepared for the surgery, hyperventilation can be given. So this is the major advantage of external ventricular drainage based ICP monitoring, that CSF drainage can be done before you proceed for the other treatment. However, external ventricular drainage has more complications, whether it is infection or hemorrhage, as compared to the parenchymal, and hence many people don't prefer external ventricular drainage, though it has therapeutic implications as well. Now the golden question which Dwarkanath introduced: why do you want to monitor ICP? The proponents of ICP monitoring, when I go for conferences, the proponents of the ICP monitoring ask this question: would you treat arterial hypertension without measuring the blood pressure? However, you cannot equate arterial hypertension with intracranial hypertension. If you give a lot of drugs to a hypertensive patient without monitoring blood pressure, he can have dangerously low blood pressure, which does not happen with giving mannitol without monitoring ICP. So this question is quite absurd. So answer to this question, the proponents give that all the patients with cerebral insult complicated by raised ICP or at risk of developing it should be considered for measurement of ICP. This is like doing too much with ICP monitoring. However, it has been found that ICP based treatment algorithms improve the consistency of care, unburden the physician and nurses from focusing on individual treatment decision, as it is a protocol based decision. There is no burden on the treating physicians. They can just follow the protocol rather than asking the doctor how to treat next, and it has been found to improve outcomes. So if you do not favor monitoring ICP for patients with head injury, there is my video on debate on ICP monitoring, which is given in the chat box. You can go through that for details. So opponents of ICP monitoring say, why to monitor ICP when we can see clinical signs, when we can see CT scan findings? So this is one of the best systematic review. I would recommend all of you to go through it. It is available on British Medical Journal, and this is the pictorial or graphic abstract of that review. So they have included mixed population like traumatic brain injury, SAH, ICH, stroke, hepatic failure, where ICP monitoring was done and when was compared with the clinical and imaging signs. So here you can see the sensitivity and specificity of common clinical signs which are indicator of raised ICP, like pupillary dilatation, motor posturing, Glasgow Coma Scale, midline shift, obliteration of basal cistern, or Marshall grading of the head injury. So most of them have low or moderate evidence to support that these clinical signs are sensitive indicator of raised ICP when ICP was monitored in this case. Midline shift more than 10 mm is definitely more specific, and obliteration of the basal cisterns are more specific for raised ICP, but they happen much later before increase in intracranial pressure. So this do not give a real-time indication of intracranial pressure. Hence, one may have to monitor ICP in this case. So before you start treating an episode of raised ICP, please look for these things. So what we have found in clinical practice, whether ICP targeted treatment is useful or not, whether it is helpful or not, we have found these false alarms are more useful in patient care rather than the ICP targeted treatment, like malfunctioning of the ICP catheter or etc. So when there is an intracranial hematoma, when you know that you are monitoring ICP for a patient who already has intracranial hematoma, and if the monitor shows high ICP, don't go on treating medically, just repeat scan and evacuate the hematoma. Like airway obstruction, when the patient is positioned, there can be airway obstruction which can give rise to the raised ICP. If there is hypoxia, hypercapnia, or if the patient has pain, he's coughing, or there is hypotension, this all can cause indirectly raised intracranial pressure. So before you start treatment for raised intracranial pressure, ensure all these things are corrected. And again, posture. Sometimes physiotherapists give physiotherapy in flat position. Sometimes they put in Trendelenburg position and the ICP will rise. So please correct this before treating ICP. Please look for the fever before you start ICP treatment. If the patient has seizure, control the seizures. If the patient has hypoosmolality, please control that before starting ICP targeted therapies. So at what threshold one should treat an episode of raised intracranial pressure? After cricket, the number 20 is more popular among neurosurgeons, as 20 has been considered as a classic threshold for treating raised ICP. However, recently it has been revised to 22, and even some centers wait up to 25 millimeter of mercury of an episode of raised ICP lasting for at least an hour or so after taking care of the basic nursing measures as I mentioned earlier before they start ICP targeted therapy. And treating ICP alone is not enough. One has to look for cerebral perfusion pressure, which the autoregulation can be impaired in head injury patients, and only ICP is not a good thing. So CPP, which is ICP minus mean arterial pressure, target should be 60 to 70 millimeter of mercury. And aggressive attempts, which was done earlier, like giving inotropes, giving a lot of fluid to increase the cerebral perfusion pressure to improve the brain blood flow, is now considered harmful. So in patients with head injury, though the evidence says that all unconscious patients should undergo ICP monitoring to reduce in-hospital mortality and two-week injury related mortality. However, recently held consensus conference mentioned that ICP monitoring may be considered if CT shows brain swelling, or if patient has large bifrontal contusion, irrespective of GCS, ICP monitoring should be done. However, it is not recommended in patient with a normal scan. It may be recommended in patient where sedation interruption is risky, like patient with respiratory failure, or if the patient has maxillofacial trauma and or spinal cord injury when neurological examination is not possible. Patients who require decompressive craniectomy, and even after craniotomy for evacuation of mass lesion, if the patient has other associated factors like hypoxia, hypotension, persistent abnormal pupils, persistent midline shift, persistent brain swelling at the end of surgery, and if the patient requires any other concomitant surgery for systemic injuries, then ICP monitoring may be considered. So forget about the evidence. I will give you one practical case scenario where ICP monitoring should be done and it is helpful. Like for example, this patient who came in M5 GCS, a young man who was admitted to ICU, ventilated, and ICP monitoring was done. He was managed medically, and then he was refractory to the management, and decompressive craniectomy was done. So this is an example, like ICP catheter was placed. You can see there is only brain swelling. There is no specific large blood clot to be removed for surgery. The ICP was 31 millimeter of mercury. And at this point, he was refractory to all the medical treatment, and he underwent hinge craniotomy, and ICP dropped down to 19 millimeter of mercury. So now you can see only decompressive craniotomy or hinge craniotomy was done, and ICP came down. So this is like real life indication of ICP monitoring. Forget about evidence and guidance. So this is a plot like before surgery, ICP kept on rising till the day of surgery, and CPP started reducing, and after surgery ICP started falling and CPP improved. So this is step ladder management of ICP. You start with intubation, normocarbic ventilation, head end elevation, CSF drainage, then mannitol or any other hyperosmolar therapy like hypertonic saline. You may give hyperventilation for a while. Hypothermia, now currently it is not recommended and it has a lot of side effects. Barbiturate may be given, but it requires very intensive care, and at last decompressive craniectomy. So I will conclude that ICP monitoring is the cornerstone of neurocritical care. So if you are starting a neurocritical care in your center without monitoring ICP, you cannot call it as a neurocritical care ICU. It will be just general medical ICU. Thank you.